Waterfall, the CCW podcast.
Hello and welcome to Waterfall. It's the water saving podcast brought to you by CCW. We're all about saving water, saving money, protecting the environment and combating climate change. I'm Mike and I'm here with Karen. Hiya, Karen.
Hello, Mike. Back at last.
I know. You were unfortunately missing and Kath had to step in. We missed you.
It's always interesting to listen to you and Kath having your conversations. So I was pleased that it all went well.
Yeah, it was good. And I know that you and Kath have some plans for some gardening episodes up your sleeve.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So that's something for people to look forward to. And you're finally getting rid of me. So that's good news, play all round. And of course, producer Tom, he's lurking in a perking. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Mike. Hello, Karen. I'm just happy to have the gang back together. You know, like Kath's awesome, but this is the podcast for me.
So we're all about water saving. We've got a great episode lined up. We have a socio-meteorologist from the UK's Met Office coming in to tell us all about, well, what is socio-meteorology all about? And what does that mean for water as our learnings? What does that mean for what we do in our behaviour with water? So some great stuff coming up from Helen from the Met Office. So stay listening for that. Before we get there, I just want to remind you can get in touch with the show. There's a whole plethora of ways you can get in touch.
I can tell people how to email us, which is
very good.
podcast@ccwater.org.uk.
We are on Instagram, waterfall_podcast, and on Twitter, we are waterfall_pod. I think that's right. I'm now doubting myself here.
That is correct, Mike, yeah.
Whew. It's traumatic. So we've covered off those, and unbelievably, people are following us on Twitter and on Instagram, which is great. And it is always good to hear from you guys. Now, I have a very quick correction. Not a correction, it's an addendum, I think, is actually the right word. Because David Clubb, who was a fabulous guest on episode 36, which was Wet and Wild Adventures in a Sponge Garden, he didn't know his personal water use, but he emailed me the very next day and he actually emailed me copies of his bill. So, just to show he wasn't just making this up. And I have to say, I was mightily impressed. David's daily water consumption, and this is averaged over 2 years, he sent me the data for 2 years, was 49 litres per person per day. He is smashing our leaderboard. That is unbelievable.
That is really impressive, isn't it? Well, I mean, It's not surprising when you consider all the steps that he'd taken to really make maximum use of the water that was falling on his property as such. It put me to shame. So.
Yeah, I mean, that is very, very impressive. So that puts him top of the leaderboard. And in a future episode, we will recap from the first half of the year the situation on our water savings leaderboards. So there we go. David Clubb, very, very impressive. Now, there's a story I have to mention before we get on to Helen Roberts in the Met Office, who is just coming up in just a second, because there was a water story that was all over the media recently that we can't not mention this. So this was the guy in India, Rajesh Vishwas, who was having a nice picnic with his pals by a reservoir, taking some selfies, drops his phone in the reservoir. Now, he's an Indian government official, so what would you do if you dropped your phone in a reservoir? Oh, I know, you'd pull some strings and get them to drain the reservoir so you can find your phone, on the basis that your phone has very important secret government stuff on there. So they drained it. They drained 2 million litres of water out of that reservoir. This is quite something. And they found his phone, and guess what? It still didn't work. So the guy's been suspended. There's a surprise, which he played no more than he deserves. I'm also shocked at who actually agreed to this, because the guy didn't even work for the water company. The guy was an Indian government official who worked in a food safety inspector. So nothing to do with water, in fact. So someone obviously agreed when he put pressure on to do this. It's just beggars belief. Anyway, funnily enough, his phone's still busted. So serves him right. And serves him right for being and serves him right for being suspended too. So there you go. What do you make of that, Karen? Did you heard of this?
Well, I did actually hear it because it was being broadcast on all the channels at the time. But I mean, it's shocking. It's truly shocking that he would value water so lowly, not to think that it was worth just throwing the phone away. In effect,
Talk about abuse of power as well. I mean, wow. I mean, I tried to use my lofty status in this podcast to get Tom to bring me a cup of coffee, but he refuses.
I actually put Mike's phone in a cup of coffee in response. So.
Oh yeah, that'll get what I deserve. Yeah, very true. Anyway, we couldn't have ignored that story, right? I mean, that story made every paper.
Hopefully, he's learned his lesson anyway.
Well, do you think he tried to put his phone in a bag of rice? Unbelievable. Right, we've got a fab episode lined up. Finding all about socio-meteorology and what that means for water. We've got Helen Roberts joining us from the Met Office. So let's just bring on the guest.
This podcast is brought to you by CCW, the voice for water consumers.
So Helen, it's brilliant to have you on Waterfall. Welcome. This isn't your first podcast.
No, I crop up on podcasts here and there. I'm the co-host of one of our Met Office podcasts called Mostly Weather. And we've actually got 3 regular podcasts at the Met Office: Mostly Weather, Mostly Climate, and Weather Snap. So I'd highly recommend a listen to any or all of those.
Well, I can vouch for them. They're very good. You are a socio-meteorologist, which is, I think you're a rare species. So what is that?
Yeah, great question. So I guess the socio part, if we split it up, is relating to people and society. So that's the social and behavioural sciences. And then the meteorologist part, hopefully fairly self-explanatory, but I spent much of my career as an operational meteorologist, weather forecaster. So I'm working at the intersection of those disciplines, trying to combine the social sciences with the sort of physical and natural sciences in a space that is really fun, really exciting, quite novel, particularly in the UK, but I'm certainly not the first to do it. There's plenty of trailblazers around the world doing this sort of work as well.
So how did you get into it?
Well, I'll try and cut a potentially very long story a little bit short. As I said, I spent much of my career as a weather forecaster, operational meteorologist. That was across a variety of different sectors, and I did that on and off, but mostly on for about 17 years. And I then changed roles and worked across a few different parts of the Met Office and different projects and programs and strategic actions, and they all had this partnerships flavour to them. And one of the remits of one of those roles was that I link up with academics in the social sciences with a specific focus on decision science and in particular the decision making processes of our meteorologists. And so I was linking up with these academics, and the more I did that, the more fascinated I became. It reignited this passion I'd forgotten I had for the social sciences and for psychology in particular. I'd sort of forgotten that I did psychology at A-level alongside physics and maths, which was rather a strange combination back in those days, but it's come full circle, and now I'm working at this intersection of all of those different types of sciences. And broadening the scope beyond just the decision making processes of our meteorologists and thinking about the decisions that our customers and users make as well. So actually the Met Office's purpose is helping people to make better decisions to stay safe and thrive. And I love that because it really puts people at the heart of everything we do. But we didn't have anyone focusing on those people aspects. So yeah, I saw this sort of niche and potentially a sort of gap in the market, if you like, for the expertise that we had in-house. You know, we've got absolutely world-leading scientists at the Met Office, but they're predominantly in the natural and physical and environmental sciences. More recently, I guess the data sciences as well. But we didn't really have anyone dedicated to the social sciences. So I thought that would be something that I could do. And I did a master's in psychology alongside my day job, which took a couple of years. And now I'm working in this role of socio-meteorology, which is brilliant.
Which bit do you enjoy the most?
I really enjoy thinking about people's biases, cognitive biases, contextual biases, and how those impact people's understanding of and response to some of the information that we're trying to disseminate. I find people fascinating. Despite being, I would say, on the introverted end of the spectrum, I love talking to people. I will always strike up a conversation with someone on the train next to me. And people have all got a fascinating story to tell. So I love delving into people's thoughts and people's brains, and these cognitive biases are a really fascinating part of that. And one of the interesting things about biases is that actually we humans are quite consistent in our divergences from rationalism, if you like. So we're quite predictable in the way that we have these biases. So I can give you an example. One of the most common and prevalent biases that we tend to have as a species is social norms. So we are really incredibly dependent on making decisions based on what we see others doing around us, particularly others that we trust or respect or at least have some knowledge of. So a good example of this I came across with recycling, and when, for example, a new food caddy is introduced to a recycling scheme, we know from the research that the first few weeks, people are a bit reticent, unlikely to do it. But they start to see one or two of their neighbours do it and think, oh, maybe I should be doing that. And then when you get this snowball effect, and as I understand it, there's a sort of critical mass of about 25% of a population before it really snowballs and the majority start to do it. And I just find that so interesting, how much weight we put on what we see others doing around us.
Have you seen an impact then since you've started taking a socio-meteorological approach to how you communicate the weather?
Yes. So and I'll caveat this with this is not down to me, and this was in effect way before I started in my role. But we've got some absolutely brilliant research on behavioural response, particularly of the public to our weather warnings. So we know not only how many people in a particular area saw the weather warning, were aware of it, knew what colour the weather warning was, but we get much more richer information in terms of what people actually did as a response to that warning. And by understanding these responses and potentially the barriers to people taking action, we can tailor the messaging much more effectively. And we are just about to start to include action statements on our warnings. So what I mean by that is specific pieces of advice that are based on the particular weather and more explicitly the impacts of the weather that we are forecasting. So for example, if we are forecasting an extreme heat event like we saw last summer in 2022, then we know that there are some types of messaging that are much more effective in terms of those advisory action statements. So for example, rather than saying something which we have often said something like, don't travel unless necessary, it's really important to explain the why behind that statement. So not just the what, but the why. So it might be better to say, using public transport during a heat wave puts you at risk of being stuck on a hot, broken down train, for example. And we also know that the timeliness and the location of these warnings are really important. So timeliness is fairly self-explanatory, although tangentially, there is some fascinating research from the States about with tornado warnings that there is an optimum time of 15 minutes. And actually, if you give more than 15 minutes of warning, then people take dangerous actions and do things like collect belongings or look for their pets or maybe even get in a car, whereas the ideal is to jump in the tornado shelter. Anyway, I digress. So thinking about the location of warnings, if during a heat event we are suggesting that people try not to use the oven, then maybe that advice would be best placed in a supermarket when people are making decisions about what to have for dinner, for example. And then there's the making sure that those messages are few and clear and really specific as well, so that people know exactly what it is that we are advising them to do. So an example of that would be, rather than a fairly vague keep an eye on vulnerable people during a heat event, ensure that your elderly relatives drink at least 2 litres of water a day. So we're being much more specific and telling people exactly what they should be doing.
I'm really interested in what you've been describing there, because I can really see some direct parallels with what we try to use in terms of messaging around water efficiency. Yeah. And more considerate use of the wastewater services as well. As you say, it's really important to explain to people why it's important.
Yes.
But also, give them the advice on what the appropriate behaviour is, or what you're really encouraging them to do in terms of changing their habits, etc.
Yeah, I think that's really important. People are time poor often, and we need to be aware of that. We can't expect people to be aware of the whys and wherefores of everything that we're asking people to do. So making it as clear and easy and simple and effective as possible is the best way that we can help people.
I just wonder whether, bearing that in mind, whether there is anything in terms of the principles that you've been applying that you think we might possibly use with sort of water-related issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think certainly some of those pieces of advice around advisory action statements are applicable in many contexts, but there's a really useful behavioural model that I've come across, and I'm sure some of your listeners have come across this as well, called the COM-B model. There are various versions of this, but I really like the simplicity. So this is COM, so C stands for capability, O is opportunity, and M is motivation. And when we're thinking about trying to influence people's behaviours, this is a really useful set of things to bear in mind. So, for example, with capability, this is both physical and psychological. So the physical capability, have I got the resources? Have I got the physical ability to do what the advisory statement is suggesting I do? But also, have I got the psychological capability? So have I got the strength or the skills or the stamina required to do this task? Then the opportunity, again, there's sort of the physical opportunity. So does the environment allow it? Have I got the time, the location, the resources? And then there's the social opportunity, which goes back to the social norms that we were talking about. So am I seeing others around me do this? And therefore, is the sort of social environment allowing me to take these behavioural actions? And then motivation, this can be sort of split into two, and this goes back to Daniel Kahneman's research from the 70s into different systems of thinking. So he talks about system 1 and system 2, sometimes referred to as fast and slow thinking or hot and cold thinking. And in this context, it's sort of reflective motivation versus automatic motivation. So automatic motivation might be our automatic processes, our desires, our impulses, whereas the more reflective motivation is when we sort of stop and have time to evaluate, have I got the motivation to do this? Do I want to do this? and then it sort of feeds back into the capability and opportunity as well. So I find this a really useful and interesting model to use when thinking about influencing behaviour.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because obviously, different people have different motivations, don't they? Certainly, we've been very conscious when we've been talking to people on the podcast that, there is in relation to water saving, there is a financial motivation potentially if you're on a water meter, and also if you're saving hot water, you can make a saving on your energy bill. But for some people, they respond more to the link with the water that they use at home and the fact that it's coming from the natural environment. But not everybody sees it in that way, or has the time or inclination to make that connection. So as I say, there's no one message, is there, that really lands with everybody?
That's absolutely right. That's something that it's really crucial for us to bear in mind when we're trying to communicate with a variety of different audiences, that people have their own motivations and abilities and desires, and yes, there isn't often a one size fits all when it comes to effective communication.
CCW, passionate about championing the best interests of everyone who uses water, now and in the future.
One of the things I'm quite interested in is almost the immediate term action as well, because I think a lot of the behaviour change and the influencing can happen over the kind of the medium term, especially with the water side of things, where, it's a sector that, best one in the world, it doesn't change that rapidly. Water and sewage services are fundamentally quite static things. They'll probably be the same, provided in the same way in 20 years as they will be in 30 years. So there's a long time track there. But one of the things that we saw last summer was, on the very, very hot days, when you were getting 19th of July, wasn't it? When you hit the 40 degrees. You were seeing on these very, very hot days that demand at the peak time in the evenings was going absolutely through the roof. And what struck me was there is some potential there for, alongside the way the weather information is being communicated, there's a behavioural side of things too, because the water companies just couldn't cope with that peak. There was enough water in reservoirs, but there wasn't enough. They couldn't get it through the system fast enough to meet demand. I'm just wondering what you thought of that kind of some sort of tie-in in that respect to help get that message across on a more immediate timescale.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I think it's definitely an area where we could work together across these different sectors, and help each other out and help to get those messages out. And weather and water are very, very well linked already. So that would seem a really intuitive way of doing things. And actually, it reminds me of I guess a sort of similar thing that's been done, although perhaps slightly different, but in the energy sector, where again they have this big issue with peaks of demand and keeping up with supply and demand, and have offered incentives for sort of spreading the load, using energy outside of peak periods, and you can imagine that those sort of nudges could be beneficial in the water sector as well in a similar way. And going back to Karen's point, it often does come down to financial incentives. They can often be the most effective, but that's not the only way of doing things. There are wider sort of educational pieces that I'm sure would be very effective as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And as you say, the different aspects in terms of what motivates people will work well with some people and not in others. And you're right, financial does tend to be the one that sticks out, particularly at the moment with people struggling with the cost of living crisis. So that's absolutely understandable. So given in the southwest where the Met Office is based, you've been in drought. Is there anything that you've seen locally in terms of the way that link between weather and water and then behaviours is being communicated? Have you seen anything sort of coming through that maybe could be rolled out elsewhere?
Well, interestingly, down here in southwest England, our BBC regional television station is called Spotlight, and one of the presenters on that is David Brain, and he has actually for many, many years, I used to work with David. I spent a few years as a BBC weather presenter.
He's a legend.
Yeah, and he for many years has talked about reservoir levels, for example, as a regular feature, particularly during the summer months on the programme. So that's reaching a huge audience, and it's just raising awareness of what those levels are like, how they're changing over time, and that's a really great first step. But I think, as you suggest, Mike, that there's more we can do in that space, but it's an interesting model to look to.
So did David do that spontaneously because he was interested?
Yeah. He did, yeah, and I asked him actually if he'd had any audience feedback, and he said, yeah, people really appreciate it. He's had lots of positive feedback. He did it a couple of times just to try it out, and got a really good response, so has continued to do it.
Can you have a word and see if he'll come on the podcast?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
He
owes me a favour, actually. So
Does it? Right. I'm not sure whether I want to pursue this line, but that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Because we are really interested in both, empowering people to make changes in their own lives and in their own houses in terms of what they do with water, but also trying to explore new ways of getting those messages across to provide that underpinning motivation. Because all our research shows that if that why question is absolutely critical, if people understand why it matters, then you're much more likely to get behaviour to change to stick. Although I'm pretty sure with your qualifications, that's a pretty obvious statement I've just made.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's really, really crucial. And it's great to work across disciplines and across sectors to try out different and better ways of doing this.
And one of the things I'd be quite interested in is, could we do a trial where we explicitly try different ways of getting the message across, and you do it on a large scale for a long period of time and actually measure it in as a scientific way as possible to see the impact. Comparing one region in very similar circumstances to another region, but then using, the weather forecast and sticking the David Brain example, someone who's talking every day about reservoir levels compared to a region in similar circumstances where they're not talking about it. Can you measure any difference? I know there's a lot of noise in that kind of experiment.
I love that idea. I think that's a brilliant idea. I'm all about testing out hypotheses, and that's what social science is often about, or all of sciences, I guess. So I mean, that would be a good idea for a sort of master's dissertation, or maybe even a PhD, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it really would be, but it needs some will behind it to give it a bit of oomph as well. And I'm sure with some thought we can get some people together, some water companies together to try and make that sort of thing happen. Because I think with the changes that we're seeing to the climate, and we can't just keep looking backwards to see what the weather's going to be like. It's a new norm. We're going to have to find different ways of communicating this stuff. So it feels like I'd never, I'm a meteorologist by background. I'd never heard of a socio-meteorologist until you entered our lives, and it feels like the stuff you're talking about is trailblazing.
Well, that's really kind of you to say, but I hope that it is. I mean, I'm certainly the first socio-meteorologist in the Met Office. I've never heard of another one, so who knows, maybe the first in the country or even the world. But as I said at the start of the podcast, I'm definitely not the only person in this space. There are others who have been doing absolutely brilliant research at the intersection of the social and the physical sciences. And given that there is only one of me in the Met Office at the moment, although I'm hoping that we will expand the profession in the coming years, I absolutely cannot do this alone. Collaborations and partnerships are absolutely vital to ensure the success of socio-meteorology and the sort of surrounding social sciences in the meteorological profession and community. So I will be heavily relying on a variety of collaborations and partnerships, which include in the academic space, but also the private sector, the public sector and charities and all sorts.
But it does feel like it needs to go beyond the kind of academic into the practical space. Yes. Because if it doesn't, then we're not going to make a difference. And given the scale of the problems that we're facing, it needs to be practical. It needs to take those further steps.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's where I feel really fortunate to be working at the Met Office, and I guess even more particularly in our services directorate. So I'm thinking about our products and services and our customers all the time, and it's all about effective change and improvement. And really making a difference, like you say. But of course, that draws on all the wonderful research that goes before that.
Well, and you're very fortunate in the Met Office to have some of the best minds in the country. I mean, some of my friends that work there, I mean, they're not so great, but mostly big shout out to Aidan. I know he's a big fan of the pod. But yeah, you've got a brilliant set of minds there who are working on stuff, and it's about, as you say, how to make an impact on the back of that. Now, we do need to ask you, going to taking a more prosaic step, about your personal water use.
Yes, I knew this question was coming, yet I still haven't properly prepared for it, I'm afraid.
That's a common theme.
My honest answer is, I don't know. I couldn't give you any figures. But what I can say is that I make a real conscious effort to minimise my water use. And in fact, one of my biggest bugbears in life generally is waste. I can't abide waste, and that goes to water as well. So I hope I do my bit. I, for example, have a water butt in the garden. I've got quite a small garden that isn't water hungry, so it can cope very well with long dry spells. And I do all those little things that hopefully add up and make a difference, like not having the tap running when I'm cleaning my teeth and only flushing the toilet when necessary, and all those sorts of things as well. So
I'm interested in the barriers that stop people knowing their water use. Is it that your meter's hard to find, or you're not on a meter, or what's going on?
Yeah, very good question. I am on a meter, and it would really not be that difficult to find out because it presumably is there on my my statements that are digital. So yeah, I pure laziness.
But it's interesting. One of our themes in Waterfall is that your capacity to reduce your water use is dependent on how much you use, right? So if you're using tons, it's easier to make these quick wins. And so we're very much interested in what's going on behind within people's heads.
Well, I guess thinking about my energy use as well, I also don't. I do have a smart meter. I don't take any notice of it because I don't think by knowing that information it would necessarily alter my behaviour, in the sense of I already feel I do probably not as much as I can, but a good amount. I do my best in my day-to-day life to minimise both my energy and my water consumption. So I'm not sure knowing the figures would hugely benefit me. On the other hand, I expect you could quite well argue that by knowing it and having that awareness, it might just nudge me to slightly less use over time.
No, it's an interesting one. I think if people are naturally frugal and careful, then being told that something that confirms that you're frugal probably doesn't help. But if you were unaware of quite a profligate water use, then I suspect that might be a different story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about people's psychology and their decision processes.
So I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I do not know puts you tied with many others actually at the bottom of our leaderboard.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah, that's fair dues.
Although we did have a guest a few weeks ago who emailed me after the show and went to check, and he has become top of the leaderboard.
Oh, excellent. Room for improvement then.
Yeah. So I think he was surprised at how low he was. So actually that he sent me a lovely message saying, actually, I knew I was low. I didn't realise I was that low. And now I'm really pleased because my nagging of my family has really helped.
guess that's the other thing, is that knowing my figures, I wouldn't have a reference point in order to know how that compares with others. So I would need that information as well, which I'm sure is very easy to find if I really looked.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of the companies have acknowledged that, and so do provide those some sort of comparisons to similar household sizes and things like that. So, you know, there are certainly ways of drawing on those comparisons and getting that sort of benchmark. Probably worth a look at your next statement.
I will do that. I will take that as some homework that I really should have done prior to this, but I promise I'll do it afterwards.
Well, the bad news, Helen, is that we've got a habit of inviting people back. So,
there we go.
We may be able to ask you in person again.
Excellent.
CCW can help you with your complaints. Visit our website to find out more, ccwater.org.uk.
So there we have it. That was Helen Roberts from the Met Office. Fabulous stuff there. Really, really fascinating. What do you make of all that, Karen?
As you say, it was really interesting. And you know, once again, to draw parallels with, you know, the link between the climate, the weather and water. And I think, you know, there are huge opportunities to kind of try to link those things together. Yeah,
and there's no magic formula for behaviour change, is there? You know, I mean, if there was, or if someone had that magic formula, they'd be very rich.
Well, yes, absolutely. But, you know, as we were saying, you know, there's that sort of habitual behaviour that you try to change, but you also need to try to communicate with people in a way that really lands with them as well, you know. So, you know, as I say, I think there are some really clear parallels there.
And great opportunities to work together. But to be honest, what's the major thing that's come out of this is we're going to get David Brain on. David Brain off the telly. How exciting.
Well, you know, he's certainly, you know, a local character, isn't he? So I think, you know, it would be great to talk to him about his interest in water.
So if we say David Brain over and over again, it's going to be hard for him to say no, isn't it? David Brain, I can't wait for you to come on. You are awesome. Do you think that'll work? Silence there. So, look, we're absolutely out of time there, which is always a good sign because we've had an action-packed podcast. So just before we go, let's remind everyone how you can get in touch with the show. We do love hearing from you.
Yes, you can email us on podcast@ccwater.org.uk.
And we have Instagram, which is waterfall space underscore. Is it space or underscore?
Underscore.
I'm still doubting myself on this one. So waterfall underscore podcast. And on the old Twitter, it's waterfall underscore pod. So there you go. Do get in touch. We'll show you some behind the scenes stuff. You can see pictures. You don't know why you'd want to see what me and Tom and Karen look like, but if you do, you can. So there you go. But thank you for listening. It's bye from me, Mike.
Bye from me, Karen.
And bye from me, producer Tom.